It's safe to say that online discourse about The Last of Us Part 2 is divided.
I'd say that I enjoyed about 60 to 70% of this game.
That is no doubt going to be remembered as probably one of the worst video game endings of all time.
The Last of Us Part 2 is a kick-ass video game that in hindsight will be recognized as one of the industry's great watersheds.
The Last of Us 2 gets half of everything right. It's a pretty good story. I haven't been this engaged by a video game story since Red Dead 2 and God of War.
If you want to be miserable, definitely buy this game.
Is it a masterpiece? Heavens no, but it has the makings of one. Is it an absolute trash fire? Of course not.
Some insist that the game is a heavy-handed pile of misery with unlikable characters and objectively terrible writing, and others had a fantastic time playing the game, loved the story, and can't stop thinking about it. Full disclosure, I love this game, but I don't love a lot of the discussion about it. You know, I think it's fine to not like something that many others like, or even something that you were hoping to love. Art and entertainment are wholly subjective mediums, and it's okay if you don't even know why you like or dislike something. Not everyone is able to put their thoughts into words in a truly critical way, as witnessed by the many game bad because bad arguments you might see on many of the videos covering this title. And honestly, I think that many people fail to understand that about themselves. What you might see is a bunch of people who understandably don't like the game, but less understandably seem to latch on to a few points that you'll see repeated over and over again by dozens of people. The problem? Those points seem to misunderstand the characters, storytelling in general, or both. Fair warning, obviously this video is going to contain some spoilers, so I urge you to leave this video if you haven't played the game yet and want to. Add this to your watch later list and come back when you're done. I believe this story is best experienced blind and without knowing what to expect. So with that out of the way, 3, 2, 1. Most of the discourse around The Last of Us Part 2 stems from this very moment, Joel's death at the hands of newcomer Abby. Understandably, this upset a lot of people. The Last of Us was a story about Joel and Ellie, their relationship, and the trauma that they suffered along the way. We bonded with Joel through that trauma and fell in love with his character and with Ellie's character. But seeing Joel die like this, well, it just didn't feel very good. We came into this game expecting Joel to be there with us for some significant part of the journey, just for him to be brutally murdered less than 3 hours into the game. But for many people, it's not just the fact that Joel dies here, it's how he dies here, and the events that lead up to it. At this point in the game, we don't know who Abby is or what her intentions are. All we know is that she has some sort of beef with someone in Jackson, and she became impatient enough to break from her group and move forward on her own. Eventually, she comes across some horse tracks in the snow and follows them. Not much time passes before she's set upon by an entire horde of infected, being forced to run for her life. Just when it looks like Abby is about to get bitten, Joel and Tommy show up to get her out of trouble. Together, the three of them fight for their lives, moving from room to room in a nearby building as they try to reach their horses. Tommy and Joel know that they're done for if they try to head for Jackson, since it's so far away. As they're trying to formulate a plan, Abby chimes in and tells the duo where her friends are holed up. Since Abby arrived here on foot, she knows that it can't be very far. Luckily, they know the mansion Abby's talking about, so they saddle up and rush towards the best idea that they have. The three arrive at the mansion safely, dispatching the infected at the front gate. The group heads inside where Joel and Tommy formally introduce themselves and offer to take them back to Jackson to resupply when Abby takes Joel's leg out with a shotgun and Tommy is knocked out. Joel is tortured by Abby until Ellie arrives, who is then taken down and disarmed. Worried that more reinforcements are en route, Abby quickly finishes Joel off, and Tommy and Ellie are left unconscious by the group as they make their exit. And here's where one of the first really big issues that people have with this story shows its head. Joel is a hardened survivor. It's important to remember that the outbreak that we witnessed in the introduction of the first game happened in 2013, with the rest of the game taking place 20 years later. Joel has spent that time surviving by honing his instincts and, most of all, exercising an abundance of caution. He lived an exceedingly dangerous life even by post-infection standards, well before he met Ellie, and those instincts and his skills that he's built up over the years are what has kept him alive through seemingly impossible odds. This is the Joel that we met in The Last of Us, and though his relationship with Ellie over the course of the game softened him a little bit, he was still very much a hard-ass by the end of the game and the year that it took them to travel across the country. Why is it then that Joel, a hardened survivor and untrusting badass, walks freely into this situation where he is surrounded by strangers and freely gives up his name and the location of his settlement? This is the core of the argument of Joel's so-called character assassination. The belief that this set of events happening in the way that it did is nowhere in Joel's character, or Tommy's character for that matter. These two would not have shared their names so freely, they would not have surrounded themselves with a bunch of strangers and would have tried to find a way out, and possibly wouldn't have even saved Abby to begin with. These are things that the Joel that we knew in The Last of Us Part 1 back in 2013 would not do. Period. And that Naughty Dog made Joel and Tommy do this shows that this is lazy writing that disrespects Joel's character and done purely for shock value. Some of this is correct at least. The Joel that we knew from The Last of Us as he was in that game definitely wouldn't be caught in this situation, but the thing is, this isn't the same Joel. 4 years have passed since the end of the first game, and with it, 4 years of living in Jackson and caring for Ellie and the people in the town. He's not the same man that he was back then, and that's by necessity. A cold, untrusting, and ruthless Joel wouldn't be compatible with the type of place that Jackson is shown to be. A friendly settlement that runs on cooperation and volunteers. Walking around Jackson in the game's prologue, it's clear that there's some sort of community and trade economy that has been established here. People have their jobs to do to keep things running, and it seems like people there are held accountable for what they need to do. Further, you can see all of these bulletin boards with notes plastered all over them. Sometimes it's an ad for an upcoming event like the dance that you saw in the game's trailer, and other times it's someone asking for help for one thing or another, or requesting volunteers for a larger project. This community runs on trust and cooperation. So Joel adapts. It's not that Joel became weak, it's more that he allowed himself to trust again. His relationship with Ellie chipped away that hard, crusty exterior that was built on 2 decades of grief from his lost daughter and just trying to survive in an oppressive community and dangerous world. And living in a friendly community like Jackson with his brother and his surrogate daughter saw Joel blossom into a loved member of the community. I think what most people have an issue with here is that most of this so-called softening happens off-screen during the 4 years since the end of the previous game. But so much of this is supported by subtext in the game's visuals, Joel's own body language and line delivery during the flashbacks, and even the jokes he cracks in the logbook of one of the lookout locations. Hell, look at the scene where you go to Joel's house after his death. So many flowers and notes. It's easy to assume that each bouquet of flowers is from a different person in the community, and it's probably safe to say that a minority of those who looked up to or respected Joel showed their affection in this exact manner. What that extrapolates to is how important Joel is to this community, and not just because he's a good patrolman. This kind of respect and affection doesn't happen just because someone is a good shot. It's because, in their eyes, he is a good person. He's kind, helpful, handy, all the traits that help make him a valuable community member, and traits that help make Jackson thrive. Is it so hard to believe then that this community might have a policy of helping strangers out and creating allies instead of enemies? If you take a look around the stables, you can see the rules for patrol, one of which is don't engage unless engaged upon. I don't believe Jackson is a place that kills people or just lets them die if they're in trouble, and as a pillar of the community, Joel knows that he has to set an example. So with all that established, saving Abby makes sense. Inviting strangers to come and resupply at Jackson makes sense too, but what about how they freely share their names? This bit is a little bit harder to explain away, but it could just come down to the trust of Jackson and trying to build trust in strangers for the good of their little settlement. It could also be a result of the situation, the panic and improvisation that the 3 of them had to go through to survive this deadly encounter with the horde of infected. Based on a lot of the comments I see, a lot of people believe Joel is the one who screwed up and offered his and Tommy's name so freely to Abby's group.
You two live nearby?
We do. A few hours down the hill. Y'all should come back with us, restock before you head out.
Appreciate it. I'm Mel, by the way.
Tommy. This is my brother.
Joe.
That's wrong. Some people take a step back and see that Tommy is the one who offered names both in the mansion and in the lodge immediately before, while they were still trying to formulate a way out.
Hey, I'm Tommy. That's Joe. What's your name?
Abby.
But that's only half true. In the lodge, Tommy did directly introduce the pair of them in an effort to calm Abby down, since it seemed almost like she was in a state of shock. A sort of way to say, you can count on us, you can trust us, possibly meant as a way to get her to fully trust them. This is the first time Joel's name is mentioned, which is definitely Tommy's bad, but moments earlier in the room with the gondolas where you're just trying to stay alive, Joel makes the first mistake.
Tommy! I'm running low! Just need another minute!
Joel shouts to his brother in a slightly panicked state, a decision to call out to his brother as if by habit to give a status update as a way to ask if Tommy's job is done yet. Infected are pouring in from seemingly every orifice, and their supplies are limited and running out. Adrenaline is coursing through his veins, no time for thought, potentially mere moments away from being killed or infected. At worst, this is an adrenaline-fueled slip-up as they're trying to survive this situation. Tommy sharing their names is the bigger mistake for sure, but he did it for a good reason. Against a horde of infected like this, there is strength in numbers. When Abby shows up, Tommy and Joel are already trying to deal with it. And Tommy has enough charisma and life experience to know techniques to help calm people down, so he, in a quick decision to snap her out of her apparent shock, introduced him and his brother in an attempt to bring her back to reality. An aside here, because it's not necessarily important to how Tommy and Joel act, but it's important to remember that at this point, Abby is still a hardened soldier, experienced at taking out infected and seraphites. I don't think that Abby is quite in shock here, at least not completely because of the horde. I think that in this moment, she's trying to reconcile her plans with what's happening at this moment. After all, she was just alluding to torturing a member of Jackson to get information on Joel's whereabouts when she was speaking to Owen not too long ago.
We can corner one of the patrols and get confirmation, and then, I don't know, maybe find a way to lure him out.
Yeah, okay. Sure, they'll be happy to offer that information up.
Well, then we make them.
Do you hear yourself?
This is also when Owen tells Abby where he saw a patrol. So while her running into Joel is pretty lucky, she was explicitly tracking down someone from Jackson from the moment she broke away from her group. Anyway, it's possible that at this moment she's trying to figure out how to get information from one of them when Tommy hands her the keys to the kingdom. Check out her no way face. Priceless. So in response to that, she tells them where her friends are holed up, and at this point they don't really have any better options, so they head towards the mansion. After they arrived at the mansion, what could they have done differently? Tommy and Joel's horses just got worked hard to bring everyone to the mansion. It was probably prudent to let them rest for a few moments. Same with themselves, they were likely worn out after that event and welcomed the opportunity to take a breather with their new companion and her friends. It's also a great opportunity to get to know them and possibly make some new allies. After all, they had just saved Abby, so their rapport is already pretty positive here. Besides, just because a couple of Molotovs were thrown at a dozen infected doesn't mean that there's not still a massive horde outside. Besides, just because a couple of Molotovs were thrown at a dozen infected doesn't mean that there's not still a massive horde outside, one which is probably just one loud noise away from another swarm. Best to lay low until it's safe, especially since their supplies are low due to the fighting. So, for all intents and purposes, they're stuck and they're outnumbered. Even if Jackson wasn't the friendly place that it is, the situation is stacked against the two of them in this moment. Outnumbered, low on supplies, and in need of a short rest. It's in their best interest here to act as cool as possible and to be friendly. The only thing that may have been foolish here is to walk directly into the middle of the room with strangers on every side, but given what they just survived, I think it's more than acceptable to believe that there's a friendly rapport in this moment. So many people talk about this set of scenes as an example of bad writing and an assassination of Joel's character, and based on the facts I've laid out so far, I couldn't disagree more. So many details are laid out to make this situation be in character for everyone, that it really just seems that people are hating on it because they hate the outcome, which by itself is fair. Even this joke, as common as it is, I'm Jonathan, and this is my brother, Quasar. This would not have significantly changed anything with the details laid out as they are. Abby's mission after she spoke to Owen on the cliff was to find the Jackson Patrol and get information about Joel, even if it meant torturing them for it. Some people even find it ridiculous that Abby could even go through what she did after she was saved by the man who she was hunting. And while I find it to be a fair criticism of her character, I find it to be a completely believable action. Her and her friends have come so far. They're all ex-Fireflies who lost everything because of this one man standing in front of them. In her eyes, one act of kindness does not erase the hospital full of her friends and family that Joel mowed down, or the world that he doomed by denying them the cure. And before you go into the comments to tell me how the cure wasn't guaranteed or whatever, save it. Who cares? It doesn't matter. As far as anyone in this story and this universe is concerned, that was the cure, and it would have worked if Joel hadn't intervened. Whether or not that's true has nothing to do with anything in this story. And the fact that all that happened, and that they believe that it's true, is all that anyone needs in terms of their character motivations. And on top of all of that, have you ever been on the cusp of finally finishing something that took you a significant amount of time to do? It could be days, weeks, months, maybe even hours, but it doesn't matter as long as it took you some amount of time. I'm sure you can relate to the tunnel vision that one might get when it comes to completing it, nearing the end of your school project or your math homework or whatever. Now imagine that you fantasized about this revenge for 4 long years. And imagine the catharsis that you think that it'll bring. In a world where taking another human's life isn't nearly as uncommon as it is in ours, I don't know if anyone can truly say without a shadow of a doubt that if they were on this mission, that they'd stop here. I won't spend nearly as much time on this one, but I've seen more than one person complain about Tommy's drastic change of heart near the end of the game. Abby lets Ellie live after the showdown in the theater, and everyone returns home. What seems to be about a year has passed since then, and Ellie and Dina live peacefully together on a farm, though Ellie is still racked with PTSD over what has happened to Joel. One day, Tommy visits with some information about Abby, and he's disappointed and downright pissed off that Ellie refuses to follow up on the information that he brought to her.
Reckon it's easy. Forget about her. You sitting all comfy way out here?
Hey.
I'll make her pay.
Tommy.
That's what you said when we got back to Jackson.
Tommy.
What a joke.
Hey, what the fuck was that?
Nothing.
God damn it, Tommy, you know what we've been...
I'll save her. She made me a promise.
I don't fucking care.
This is after trying to convince her not to go after Abby at the beginning of the game, and after he showed up in the theater to help convince Ellie to go back home to Jackson. And then after all of that, he's bitter and aggressive when Ellie won't follow up on the revenge mission? What gives? To be fair, there's not a lot of people who find this change in Tommy unreasonable, but there's enough that I wanted to put it in this video. Even many of the people who vehemently hate the prologue understand Tommy's shift here. After all, Tommy was a very skilled individual, a strong leader, and a capable fighter, and the events that transpired in Seattle left him crippled and half blind. At this point, Abby didn't just kill his brother. She very nearly killed him and took away much of his identity and his capability. It's no wonder that he's filled with resentment towards her, an anger that has room to fester as he heals, culminating in an obsession, and Ellie is the only one who can reasonably follow it through. Oh, and he's also having marital issues, and whether or not that's fueling the obsession or is caused by it, it definitely doesn't help the situation. Tommy lost part of himself in Seattle, and the person responsible for that is still out there. He's consumed. I feel like there's some kind of misconception about what a story's overall purpose is. I'm speaking in a more general sense here. I'm sure we've all had the experience of being a snot-nosed middle schooler, being forced to read stuffy old books from generations past, and forced to derive meaning from and analyze them. And that's great. I think we should all spend a little more time thinking about the stories we consume and figuring out how they affect us personally. But there's another side to that, and that's authorial intent. And while that does have some place in some discussions, I think that overall, who cares? The author could intend some message to come across in their work, but without them there to explicitly tell you what everything means, all you can do is speculate, and why bother? All that really matters is what the work means to you. Unfortunately, this is something that's kind of beat into many of us in schools, where we're forced to read something like To Kill a Mockingbird, and then asked to decipher what the author meant by this passage or that paragraph, and I think that more often than not, that's the wrong question to ask. I love when complex works are analyzed and overanalyzed and torn apart critically, but that love breaks down when it crosses the line of attributing personality traits or beliefs to a creator because of their art. Sure, the art is a product of the creator's personality and upbringing and environment and so much more, and those experiences can and will inform what happens in a story. But sometimes a person just wants to tell a story. Maybe that story happens to be somewhat dark, and maybe it has recurring themes of marital infidelity, racism, sexism, homophobia, and alcoholism, all at the same time. Does any of that necessarily tell you anything about the author or the actors within it? I would argue that no, not really. It doesn't even betray the author if these awful themes prevail, with the villain or anti-hero getting what they want or winning. Maybe all the author wanted to do was tell a dark story in that setting and explore what their characters do within that framework. This may have seemed like a massive tangent, but the reason that I bring it up is because there seems to be a lot of people attributing things to Neil Druckmann because of the actions that his characters take in the story, and then trying to use that as proof that the game is bad, or is only written to fulfill some sort of agenda or something. Ridiculous things like saying he hates Joel because of the way he was killed and then has the self-insert character of Manny spit on the corpse. Reductive things like saying that the story is trying to hammer in the message of revenge bad down our throats at every turn, when the story is more about an exploration of Ellie's and Abby's experiences through the cycle of vengeance and how it affects them and their relationships. Short-sighted ideas like Ellie bad, she killed dog, Abby good, she pet dog, when all it is characters interacting with their environment in ways that the situations require of them to survive. There's this idea going around that the game is trying to emotionally manipulate us with all this stuff, and, well, yeah, I guess you're not wrong, but why is that a problem? Stories are supposed to make you feel something, right? Stories are emotional manipulation machines. In the show Made in Abyss, when Flesh, do you think I got angry and accused the show of manipulating me into being upset and then stopped watching it because of that? No, I bawled like a freaking baby because I was invested in the story. Was I emotionally manipulated? Sure, maybe. I don't know. What the hell does that even mean? That the story made me feel something? Okay. Isn't that the story's purpose? I consume these things because I want to feel things, experience things, and be affected by them. I think the difference for many people is the fact that you control the character that does these things, but it really shouldn't matter because the story is going to go where the story wants to go. Player be damned. This isn't a game about choice. If you feel bad because you made Ellie kill a dog in the game, that's on you. And if you feel bad because of that, then explore that. Making Abby's dad save animals in Abby's flashback isn't supposed to demonize Ellie, it's supposed to give some context to Abby's loss. Playing fetch with Alice isn't supposed to show you that Ellie is a heartless dog killer, just that Abby loves her dog, and even to further characterize Yara and Lev, who have a general fear of dogs because they grew up in a society that is at war with one that uses these animals as tools of war. I've seen people try to support this whole Ellie bad, Abby good shtick by saying that revenge was bad for Ellie, but good for Abby because of how the game ends with Ellie letting Abby go and then returning home having lost everything. But that's so far from the truth. Abby gets her revenge, sure, but Ellie literally destroys Abby's life as a result. All of her friends are murdered, and though not exactly Ellie's fault, she is ostracized from her faction and loses her home, her position, and her other friends in the WLF. Even before Ellie rips and tears through the former Fireflies, Abby's relationship with her friends is very strained because of her actions in Jackson.
There's nothing to fall for.
Isaac's top scar killer suddenly had a change of heart.
Nothing to do with Owen. Right? I haven't always done the right thing. You're a piece of shit, Abby. You always have been.
Neither Ellie nor Abby are painted in a particularly positive light in this game. They both commit buckets of murder for their cause, whether it's on screen to avenge their father or to fight a war on behalf of their home. The story is just about two characters in two different phases of a brutal cycle of revenge from two different worlds, and everything that those actions and traits affect along the way. So what if the story can be reduced down to revenge bad? Nearly any story can be reduced down to its core ideas or setting and sound like a boring or overused trope. There are so many more arguments, but I'm already running the risk of this video being called a pointless straw man as it is, and I think you get the point. Listen, I don't think that this is a perfect game. I absolutely have my problems with it, especially when it comes to the game's pacing. I feel like it's a couple of hours too long and could have been a stronger overall story if some segments were cut to keep it from dragging in some areas, and the decision to hard cut during the climax to 3 days before is an incredibly bold choice that I'm still not sure if I actually like. Sometimes I think that Abby's sections should have been interspersed with Ellie's in a more chronological way, but it's hard to say how that would affect the story and cohesiveness of the narrative, especially given the fact that Abby, somewhat ironically, is not directly affected by Ellie's actions until the third day when she discovers Owen and Mel. I don't mind how the two stories don't intersect until the climax because it feels pretty natural in the way that it's written and feels like the more realistic result, but because of that lack of crossover, I kinda wish Abby's story was an entirely different campaign or maybe even DLC. Keeping the two stories separated I think would have made the individual stories a bit more powerful and would have given each campaign a little more room to breathe and develop characters without feeling like it was overstaying its welcome, since it would essentially feel like two different games. But hey, that's just speculation. As far as Abby's concerned, stories like to give the point of view of their antagonist all the time, but I get it. The whole thing hits way different when you're literally forced into the shoes of that character that the game has asked you to hate, and then asked to fight for them and help them survive, especially after murdering someone beloved like Joel, and after having such a powerful advantage on Ellie in the moment of that climax that they cut away from. Again, it's a bold move, and there are a lot of things that could be criticized about this game, but it seems that most of this discourse surrounding this game's story are, I don't want to say wrong, because I don't think that's quite the right word, but they feel like overblown knee-jerk reactions from people who don't like the game and are struggling to accurately put into words why that is. So they're latching onto the first theory that kind of sort of makes sense. Unjust, maybe? Does that work? This game is being crucified for crimes it didn't commit by people who misunderstood its intentions and claimed ownership over the characters' personalities and fates. I never originally intended to make a video about The Last of Us 2, but after I beat the game, I couldn't help but dive headfirst into the discussions surrounding the game, and my thoughts became consumed by this discourse. So many videos and comments calling this game just a trash fire, and unironically the worst game of the year, and lazy and so much more. So many videos completely disrespecting the hard work that I wanted to say my piece. I know it's over a month late at this point, so I've completely missed the hype train, and most people have probably moved on, but oh well. I love this game, flaws and all, and I felt like defending it. Was that a mistake? Probably. Time will tell, I guess. If you made it all the way to the end, you can use the fake word defendly in your comments somewhere to let me know, as in, I think the defendly way you approached this video was cringeworthy. Anyway, thanks for making it this far. You'd be surprised at how many people don't make it to the end of a video, so I really do appreciate it. And I especially appreciate people like Eric Lawrence, who is kind enough to be a channel member at the highest tier, and to everyone else, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.